Newt Gingrich is a former House Speaker and Fox News contributor. He is also the author of a new book, Trump and the American Future. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of the tearing down of statues across the country right now?
Well, first of all, I don't know if he intended to, but Governor Cuomo now made clear what the choice is. If you want to live in a country with looters and people who tear down statues, you ought to vote Democrat. If you think that we ought to have law and order, that people should not tear down statues, people should not loot, people should not establish independent zones in Seattle, then you ought to vote Republican. I mean, we're coming down to, I think, and I said this in my book, maybe the most important election since Lincoln in 1860. The whole notion, and by the way, I think every American should be deeply offended by Nancy Pelosi's comment that Senator Scott and the Republicans killed George Floyd. I mean, I think she's losing her mind. I mean, how could any responsible person say something like that? And yet that's what it's going to become like, because the gap between the two sides is so enormous. Look, in the end, you're going to start arresting people. You have no choice. If once the mob is out of control, if you don't stop it, it just gets bigger, more vicious, more bloody. This is like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution or Mao's Cultural Revolution. And I think the president's right. It's sad that you have governors who are pro-destruction, who are pro-mobs.
But Democrats would say that there are people who are uncomfortable celebrating statues of leaders who, had slaves, who fought on the wrong side of the Civil War, that you learn about your history by putting these statues into a museum, that you don't glorify them by putting them on a pedestal.
Fine. So you're Governor Cuomo. You have absolute control of the New York State legislature. You're the governor of the state. You don't like a statue? There's a legal, methodical, under the rule of law, way to move the statue. You're a citizen. You see a statue you don't like, you have a right to petition your government. No one has the right to go out on their own and start destroying things randomly. And once you tolerate it for Group A, then Group B gets to do it. And then Group C gets to do it. And once you get people in the habit of saying, why don't we go down Fifth Avenue and loot the Nike store? I mean, no, there's a real testimony against civil rights problems. Let's go loot the Nike store, which they did. Well, you understand exactly what was going on. And I just will tell you, I believe that what Cuomo said is a disgrace. And one more, just as he had a dereliction of duty in terms of the virus, he has a dereliction of duty in terms of protecting his citizens.
Meanwhile, President Trump getting a do-over after the criticism of his Tulsa rally, speaking yesterday to a packed house of students at a Phoenix church, where he laid into Democrats in classic campaign style. Listen to this.
The radical left, they hate our history, they hate our values, and they hate everything we prize as Americans, and we're right. Because our country didn't grow great with them. It grew great with you. They are trying to do their best to keep the country shut down and closed because they'd love those numbers not to be good, but there's not a lot they're going to be able to do about it. This will be, in my opinion, the most corrupt election in the history of our country, and we cannot let this happen. They want it to happen so badly.
So, of course, the first criticism is that this is a packed house where people were shoulder to shoulder and they weren't wearing masks. What do you say about that?
Well, I say about that first that people who are under 25 or 30 are at very, very low risk. They may get the virus, but it's not going to hurt them very much. I'd say second, by the way, the Tulsa thing's totally overblown. Fox had the biggest Saturday night in its history, 20 million people between Fox, C-SPAN, and live streaming. 20 million people watched that speech in Tulsa. And I think they obviously have learned a few things about packing houses, and they're going to do fine. The president's making a point to the whole country.
Let me ask you, though, along that line, hang on, though. When you talk about how many people watched those, that does bring up the point that Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump by 14 points in a head-to-head poll.
Absolutely.
Biden 50, Trump 36. Also, Trump's trailing Biden among independent voters, 18 percentage points. How do you explain that then?
First of all, if they can keep Biden in the basement long enough, he might become president. Because as long as you don't see him and you don't think about him and you don't worry about his record and you don't look at what he's promising, you might get there just because people are tired. And after all, he is so passive right now. Maybe that's what they want. Second, I don't believe any poll at this stage of the game. I campaigned with George H.W. Bush when he was 19 points behind Dukakis in May, and he beat Dukakis by 8 points in November. I think when we get into the campaign and people start thinking about a Pelosi, Schumer, Biden triumvirate running the entire country, I think they're going to melt very rapidly. And I personally think Trump's going to get reelected, probably by a surprising margin.
Police reform efforts in Congress, it looks like now we've learned, are faltering. A short time ago, Senate Democrats, as you may have heard, blocking debate on Republicans' police reform bill. All Democrats except 2 and 1 independent voted against it. This was after calling the bill half-hearted and toothless. Republicans hitting Democrats for refusing to even debate the measure. Listen to this.
If this bill were such a good path to reform, why wouldn't civil rights organizations from one end of America to another say, go forward, maybe we'll get something done? Because they know the bill is a ruse and nothing will get done.
But by not even getting on the bill, Madam President, they're saying to the American people, we don't care about you having a voice in this process.
What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, the Democrats could have worked out a deal where they could offer amendments. We used to have a process called legislation. Of course, this was in the pre-Pelosi dictatorship era, when people actually would go to the floor. When I was Speaker, we'd actually have votes. People would bring up ideas. So if the Democrats wanted to try to improve the bill, they could. But it'll be interesting to watch the elite media seek to avoid responsibility here. The president is prepared to move forward in police reform. Tim Scott's prepared to move forward in police reform. The Senate Republicans are prepared to move forward. Who's blocking it? Oh, Schumer's blocking it. So maybe the Democrats ought to take some heat from somebody for not even being willing to go into an amendment process to see if they could improve the bill. This is just, you're in a cycle right now where it is all politics all the time, and it's bad for the country. And at least the president issued an executive order and took first steps towards police reform, despite the Democrats doing nothing.
Before we run out of time, I want to ask you about your new book, because we're all looking for something good to read this summer. Trump and the American Future. Tell us about it.
Well, I decided to write it because I do believe this is the most important election in 160 years. And I wanted to outline the case. And so we have a strong chapter on China. We have a strong chapter on crime and law and order. We have a very strong chapter on radicalism among the House Democrats. 2 good chapters on health care, what has to be improved, how to fix it. I think if you're interested in, from our side at least, of being a conservative, if you're interested in being able to argue the case and be able to have the facts and the information, I think that Trump and the American Future is a very effective book to have, because you're going to be able to take most of the major issues that come up this year are covered in that book and give you the tools to go out and meet with your friends and have a good chance to convince them that you're going in the right direction.
Speaker, I love it. Yeah, you can sit there. We can all read it, and you can get your points straight before you go to fight with your family over Thanksgiving or Memorial Day or whatever, Labor Day, whatever it is. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.